Involving Baylor. The Bears and Sooners lead the way this week. We're picking the biggest games as contenders squeeze in for just 4 playoff spots. In Man vs. Metric, we welcome back Mark Schlabach. For the Ducks' chances on spoiling Stanford, maybe, and is Oklahoma State getting snubbed? Our committee, Phil Steele, and new to the table this week, Kevin Carter. I'm sure like the College Football Playoff Committee, won't always agree, but it'll be fun anyways. On the Edge right now. Welcome into The Edge, and happy Friday. I'm Brendan Fitzgerald. We're ready to get you ready for Week 11 in college football. The stretch run is here. The playoff rankings evolving. It's a fluid situation. And is this the week we see a Big 12 team finally climb into the top 4? Let's welcome in Phil Steele and Kevin Carter. And we'll start with where game day is going. Waco, Texas, number 12, Oklahoma, taking on Baylor. Phil, first, a key in this matchup you're watching for.
Well, I'll tell you, my computer loves Oklahoma. They come in the number 2 team in the country in my computer. They're top 7, both offense and defense. Last 3 games, they're averaging over 300 yards per game rush and 300 yards per game pass. And while Baylor has dominated teams during the season, they're plus 174 yards per game in Big 12 play, Oklahoma's doing even better at plus 235 yards per game in Big 12 play. Now, with Stidham at quarterback, Baylor only got by Kansas State on the road by 7. Oklahoma beat that same Kansas State team on the road by 55. But quarterbacks' first road starts are usually the toughest. They led that 31-10 in that game, and Baylor has beaten Oklahoma by 29 and 34 the last 2 meetings.
What strikes me on this matchup is, not about Oklahoma. Oklahoma is better on offense. I think the addition of Lincoln Riley to this offense has made Baker Mayfield just a weapon. They've spread everyone out. They go 5 wides. They crease you. They send seam routes down the field on you, and they really put a lot of pressure on a defense, so we know they can score points. We know that their defense is good. They're even better than they were last year. They're number 1 in the Big 12 in scoring defense. But what stands out to me is about Baylor. Having Jarrett Stidham at quarterback means you don't have an added run threat like a Seth Russell. When you look at what the Baylor offense did to improve itself this year, is it had Seth Russell as a weapon in the offense when you don't account for him in the run front. So Jarrett Stidham isn't that guy. He's not the guy who's going to take off and run, and they can't take a chance in getting him injured down the stretch of this season. So this Baylor offense is going to change, and we saw that against Kansas State. We didn't see the rushing yards. We saw a lot more pressure on the quarterback to find the open receivers. He has the guys on the outside to do it, and Corey Coleman and Katie Cannon, but I don't think they can get it done against the Oklahoma defense.
We'll see if Jarrett Stidham, how he responds in this big game. He had a bye week to get ready for Kansas State. Now that was on a Thursday, extra time to get ready for maybe the Big 12's best defense. So, Phil, who wins this matchup in Waco?
Well, as I mentioned, I could make a great case for Oklahoma, but I'm going to go with Baylor. In the last 5 years, they've played 8 ranked teams at home. They've pulled 4 outright upsets and won all 8 games. Baylor's a much better team at home than they are on the road. In fact, they outgained their opponents by 360 yards per game at home. I just can't see Art Briles letting this one slip through his grasp. I'm going to call for Baylor to escape with a very close win.
My defensive coordinator, my first year in the NFL was a guy named Willie Shaw. If his name sounds familiar, he's David Shaw, Stanford's head coach's father. And he said that every Sunday you're going to see a bunch of guys throw for 1,000,000 yards, and they're going to light it up in the passing game. But if they can't run the football, don't even worry about them because they're going to lose. I'm going with Oklahoma in this matchup because they can run the ball, they can pass the ball. Baker Mayfield is a weapon, and they play better defense than Baylor. I got Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner.
We enjoy disagreement on this program, Kevin. Come back anytime. The FPI has Baylor at 58%.
Love it.
And this game will be on ABC, 8 Eastern kickoff between Oklahoma and Baylor. The 20-game home winning streak is on the line for the Bears. Let's go to the SEC. The chips fell. The dominoes. Oklahoma and number 2 for Baylor. Each of these teams top 2 in the nation. in scoring differential, outscoring opponents by about 30 points per game, each of them. We'll see what happens in Waco. It is time for Man vs. Metric, our weekly look at how the computers stack up with the eye test of ESPN senior college football writer Mark Schlabach. Mark, let's talk about that one. Baylor hosting Oklahoma. The FPI says Oklahoma, the more complete team, has the Sooners as the best team in the nation right now, but Bears are favored because of home field advantage. What do you say?
I think the guys that do FPI are a lot smarter than me, but this is what I call an absolute epic fail. There is no way in the world Oklahoma should be the #1 football team in the country. This is a team that lost to a 1-4 Texas team, 24-17 on a neutral field in Dallas. Since then, Texas was shut out at Iowa State, so the Longhorns haven't exactly done the Sooners any favors. Look, they're playing great. Baker Mayfield's done a great job in that offense. Great 1-2 punch at tailback. But let's be honest, they beat Kansas State, Texas Tech, Kansas, and Iowa State. I think it's the road, the resume just doesn't hold up at #1.
Elsewhere in the Big 12, Oklahoma State made a big jump after the win over TCU last week, but the metrics say not big enough. The Cowboys' second best strength of record in the country. So, Mark, did the team from Stillwater get snubbed by the committee this week?
I actually think Oklahoma State's probably about where they need to be. Certainly that 49-29 win over TCU last week, probably one of the better victories of any team in FBS this season. But you go back, it's become the theme with the Big 12. Look at that non-conference schedule. At Central Michigan, FCS opponents, Central Arkansas, UTSA. I think Oklahoma State, like Baylor, can make a lot of noise at the end of the season, but up until this point, really haven't accomplished that much outside of the TCU win.
Last one, big picture on the Big 12's playoff hopes, Mark. The computers project more than a 70% chance that every team in the conference will have at least one loss. Do you think the Big 12, Mark, gets left out of the playoff for the second year in a row?
Well, I think the selection committee has made a pretty clear statement the last couple of weeks that they're going to continue to penalize these Big 12 teams for the soft non-conference schedules. And we'll find out if they penalize the league for the second year in a row for the lack of a true conference championship game. I think if Baylor or Oklahoma State finish undefeated and have wins over TCU, Oklahoma, and each other, I think it's going to be really difficult for the committee to leave them out of the playoff. We already see Notre Dame at the #4 spot. That's based on wins over opponents like Pittsburgh and Temple and Southern Cal. I think at the end of the day, if one of those two teams, Oklahoma State or Baylor, finishes undefeated, I think their overall body of work would be as impressive as what any other one-loss team in the country has done.
It certainly will be impressive if any of those teams go undefeated, judging by the November schedule of all of those Big 12 powers. Mark Schlabach, thanks very much. If you've been paying attention, the Big 12 all about offense, and first in the FBS as far as conference ranks go in points per game, yards per game, and 20-yard plays per game.
Down the stretch they come. The Big 12 finally begins to prove its value to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Obviously, the conference champ will have the best shot at getting in, and the numbers suggest it's a wide-open race for the top 4 teams. According to ESPN's Football Power Index, Baylor has the best chance to win the conference at 37%. The Bears also are the FPI projected favorite in 3 of their 4 remaining games. But their opponent on Saturday, Oklahoma, is ranked #1 in the country in FPI, which means the Sooners are projected to be the strongest of the Big 12 teams. Over in Stillwater, Oklahoma State is ranked #2 in the nation in strength of record, which measures the strength of a team's record given its schedule so far. Pretty impressive considering the only team better is the top-ranked Clemson Tigers. And while TCU is coming off a loss to the Cowboys last week, don't count the Horned Frogs out just yet. Of the 4 teams battling for the Big 12 title, the FBI says TCU has the best chance to win the rest of its regular season games. Now the bad news. The FBI projects a 73% chance the Big 12 champion will have 1 or more losses. One loss kept the conference out of the college football playoff last season, which probably means the safest way in is to run the table.
And we welcome back Phil Steele, and we'll start with a Big 12 matchup, Oklahoma State and Iowa State. People in Stillwater are going to be wondering for a long time, what if about 2011, when Oklahoma State finished number 3, there was no college football playoff, it was Iowa State that tripped them up. Phil, what do you expect in this one?
Yeah, they would have been in the national title game had they won that game. And this is a sandwich situation for them. After that big win against TCU, they've got Baylor and Oklahoma on deck. They're also playing with undefeated pressure. When you're undefeated, you've got a lot of pressure to stay unbeaten as the season goes on, as we saw in that 2011 game. Now, Mike Warren, the running back for Iowa State, 997 yards rushing, 5.8 yards per carry. Oklahoma State's top running back, just 365 yards rushing, 3.8. Oklahoma State is averaging just plus 56 yards per game in Big 12 play, not that dominant. And Iowa State was tied with Iowa with 3 minutes left. That's an unbeaten Iowa. They only trailed TCU 24-21 at the half. They shut out Texas. I'm still going to call for Oklahoma State to go on the road and get the win. I've got this one, Oklahoma State 38-24.
Start of a really tough stretch for the Cowboys, and they'll play Iowa State. Iowa State has had a tough stretch. They were on the road against Oklahoma last week. Now they get the Cowboys undefeated. But you can see for Oklahoma State, the Football Power Index says just an 11% chance to run the table and potentially grab that playoff spot. Trophy game for Minnesota. They play a lot of them. They'll play for the Floyd of Rosedale against Iowa. At one point, it was a live pig. Now it's just a bronze statue. Phil, what happens in this one between the Gophers and Hawkeyes?
Yes, thank goodness it's a bronze statue. You know, Iowa's playing with undefeated pressure as well. And this is a Minnesota
game, ABC in Waco. College game day is there. Oklahoma at Baylor. Baylor finally gets to prove itself against a real opponent. Oklahoma, according to our Football Power Index, is number 1 in the country, the best team in the country. They're the only one that's top 15 in offense and defense. Break this game down for me, Joey Galloway.
You know, the Baylor team, the question mark is on their defensive side of the ball. And Kansas State last Thursday ran for 250 yards against this
Guys
Baylor
were out
defense.
of position. Guys were missing tackles.
Missing tackles. And people always talk, when you talk Big 12 and people will tell you how many points they score, it's not the points that are scored, it's how they are scored. You always see missed tackles. You see guys running wide open. Oklahoma has run the ball very well their past 4 games. I think they're like 290-some yards rushing their past 4 games. If I'm Oklahoma, I come into this game with the idea of I'm going to run it down Baylor's throat for 2 reasons: to control the ball, but to keep Baylor's offense on the sideline. If you keep them on the sideline, you have a chance to win. Kansas State lost to Baylor. I think it was a 7-point game, had a chance in the end. So run the ball at Baylor, keep the offense on the sideline. Oklahoma, you already talked about their defense. I like Oklahoma in this game.
Why don't we talk about Baker Mayfield more? In the year, he's at 70% completion, 28-4, touchdown to interception.
The only reason,
I like to run the ball some, but boy, and that's the thing about this game, Joey, is people always ask, if you're playing Baylor, can you hang with them in a shootout? Yeah. Oklahoma's been putting up ungodly points as well. So to me, it comes down to which defense do I trust more? And I absolutely trust Oklahoma's defense more.
I agree. And there's 2 reasons why we have not talked about Baker Mayfield in the season he's having. It would be Seth Russell at Baylor and then Trayvon Boykin at TCU. That is the only reason why Baker Mayfield hasn't gotten more credit for what he has done. And now that he has a run game, only makes him more dangerous. He's more athletic than people think when you watch him play. He has a knack for getting out of tackles, getting the extra yard, and he can throw the ball. As this season moves forward, if Oklahoma can win these games at Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, we will be talking more and more about Baker Mayfield.
I'll tell you what else we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about how would you leave them out of the Final Four. If they win these last 3 games, they would have stubbed their toe in a big way. One bad loss to Texas, no question. But outside of that, they will have beaten as good a schedule if those 3 teams are as good as we think they are. We think all those teams are at least pretty good. They beat Tennessee in the out-of-conference. People make fun of the out-of-conference schedule. This is not Baylor's out-of-conference. They did play Tennessee.
I'll put it to you this way, Joey. This is what I've said, that Notre Dame's sitting at 4 with 1 loss. Mm-hmm. Alabama's ahead of it with 1 loss. Outside of Alabama, I have said there is no 1-loss team that can pass Notre Dame. Would you agree or disagree? And really what I'm looking at there is a team like Oklahoma State, I mean, Oklahoma with the one loss, possibly
Stanford.
Florida.
Well, Stanford would have to beat them. I take it back. Sorry.
Florida, if they were to beat Alabama in the SEC. I'm saying not one-loss team other than Alabama was already ahead of them can pass Notre Dame.
I don't think they will either, and it's simply because Stanford is sitting at number 7. If Notre Dame beats Stanford at number 7, then that will be equal to what anybody else can do at this point because of Notre Dame's schedule up till now. I agree with you that no one-loss team passes Notre Dame. The Oklahoma issue, it could come down to the same thing, and you say, how could they get left out? Well, TCU would have the same argument last season. They got left out on a one-loss season where they had an incredible season beyond that, and they got left out. It can happen.
Coming up next, if you are close to someone who plays football, then what we're going to talk about is the most important thing you'll hear all day. So please stay with us.
Disrespected, and they feel disrespected. I understand. Baylor's at number 6. They were at number 6 the first week. They were at number 6 the week after. They've been jumped by Iowa. I understand they have games coming up. But the fact that they've been jumped, especially by an Iowa team, to me says the committee is saying, look, we don't respect what you've done so far.
If Baylor beats Oklahoma, won't that change?
I think
Baylor hasn't beaten a team with a winning record yet.
I think the committee has said, Baylor, Big 12, you don't deserve anything right now. We're waiting to see. I mean, because they are ranked. There's 3 of them ranked in the top 10 or top 12 with Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. So if one team starts beating all of them, they're going to start getting.
Here's what's strange to me about that equation, though, and this is always weird. I understand how the committee works. I don't understand this part of it. So Baylor comes out at 6 the first week, and Iowa's at 9. 1 week later, Baylor beats Kansas State in a 7-point game.
Right.
Iowa beats Indiana in an 8-point game.
Right.
And Iowa jumps Baylor.
There was
from
random.
9 to 5.
I agree with that. I
mean, that is strange to me.
It's worthy of enormous criticism. Look, let's face it. No one's going to criticize the committee now because we all know that these rankings they're putting out on a week-by-week basis are purely for our enjoyment. They don't really mean anything because they can change whatever they want.
And my job security. Don't mess with
I
need the job.
I love the show, and that's the point. They put the rankings out. You guys argue about it. It's fabulous for ESPN. But the reality is, to have Iowa jump Baylor this week was insane. I mean, it made no sense whatsoever.
Move up as much as they did.
Those are the questions for me. You sat down and said Baylor's better than Iowa 7 days ago.
Right.
In a weekend when both teams won a close game against an unranked opponent, all of a sudden Iowa is now better.
That's my point.
Strange.
And listen, for the Iowa fans who are yelling at me, you should have been ahead of Baylor the week before.
There you go. That's the argument.
Teams.
Yeah. That's the argument.
I have zero issue with Iowa being ahead of Baylor. I have an issue with them having jumped them this week based on nothing. What did they say? The argument has got to be, well, we looked a little closer this week and realized our previous pick didn't make any sense.
The former.
All right, next game. In fact, I want to stop the music on this because I've been meaning to get to this all morning long, and shame on me for not doing it. The game is number 2 Alabama against number 17 Mississippi State.
Backloaded schedule. Will the Big 12 get left out of the playoffs for a second consecutive year, Robert?
No, not by my projections.
Okay.
I think one of these teams is going to rise up. Maybe it's going to be Oklahoma State or Oklahoma. Those are really the 2 teams that I think have the best opportunity. Of course, Oklahoma State still undefeated. Impressive win a week ago against TCU. I'm a little bit concerned about them on the defensive side of the ball, but they've looked pretty good so well, and they get these tough games at home against Baylor and Oklahoma. But if Oklahoma only has one loss, a bad loss in the Red River rivalry game against Texas, I still think that their schedule, if they go through the rest of the way undefeated, would be enough head-to-head against, say, a Notre Dame or even a Stanford out of the Pac-12 for the Big 12 to get into the playoff.
Yeah, here's the difficult task at hand is I can only base this on what they've done in the past. In the past, they left them out. So they said, you don't have a conference championship. So they were left out last year. And right now they're left out, and they've got 2 undefeated teams, and there's 2 one-loss teams in there. I think if those 2 one-loss teams in Bama and Notre Dame continue to win, and Notre Dame beats Stanford at the end, and they don't stub their toe, I don't know how these 2 teams leapfrog them. But with that being said, we also saw teams get leapfrogged, and it was TCU and Baylor last year. So it can happen. I don't know how much strength the playoff committee is going to place in these 4 teams playing this round robin at the end of the season. As of now, they're left out. I mean, in our week-to-week progressions, they're not in mine, but they can get in because I really don't think this thing's holding pat.
Well, but I think you heard Art Briles talking about it there. They know that their schedule is backloaded, so I think it's a very specific set of circumstances right now, and it's a snapshot that the College Football Playoff Committee is looking at. And last year was completely different. The reason they got left out last year, and the only reason they got left out last year, is because Ohio State won 59-0 in extremely convincing fashion in the Big Ten championship game over a very good Wisconsin football team. That's the only reason, and I think it needed to be that, or else Ohio State would have been left out.
I think a lot of these next. Go ahead, Jason.
So the difficulty here for me, though, is I think Oklahoma is the only one who can get in unless the other ones stay undefeated. You lose in November, it's hard to overcome that loss.
That's a really good point. Oklahoma's the only one that could make it with the one loss at this point. You're right.
A lot of crucial matchups in the next several weeks. We've got Baylor and Oklahoma this Saturday, and we'll have our game picks later. Now, when they released those rankings, the Bears looked up and thought, did the Hawkeyes just pass us? Yep, indeed they did. So after a hard-fought win over Indiana, Iowa shut up 4 spots at number 5 ahead of Baylor and at the doorstep of the prestigious top 4. So while many were surprised at the Hawkeyes' huge lead, keep in mind they do have 2 wins over ranked teams and 2 more non-conference wins over Power 5 teams. So guys, is Iowa an actual contender to win it all? Jason?
Right now, no. And they've somehow skirted Michigan State, Michigan, and Ohio State, but that's going to change in the Big Ten championship game because I think they're going to get there, and they'll have their opportunity to make a statement. This could be that game maybe where we were talking about the playoff committee looking at an Iowa versus a Baylor undefeated or Oklahoma State undefeated and thinking to themselves, okay, they've got that one impressive win in the championship game, but these two teams were undefeated. So I think that it's a tougher task for them based on their strength of schedule and the fact that they have somehow, their schedule didn't have to face those 3 big teams in the other division.
No, they're not a contender to win it all. I think the most that they can do is win the Big Ten West. And that's not going to be easy. They still have to play Minnesota. They still have to play at Nebraska. It's going to be tough. But you pointed it out, Jason. It was the scheduling and allowing them to miss Michigan State and Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State all out of the East, really the top 4 teams out of the East this season. I've been impressed with them. Quite a turnaround. Kirk Ferentz and his squad from a year ago, dealing with the injuries at the running back spot. Inconsistent, though, still with that offense. The defense, though, has been tremendous. But they are not contenders to win it all. They are contenders just to win the West. Whoever it is they face out of the East in the Big Ten championship, they go down right there. And even if they somehow make it into the playoffs, there's no way they win it all.
All right, so both of you guys feel the same way. All right, well, just like the Hawkeyes leapfrogged the Baylor Bears, Alabama's running back might have leapfrogged the nation's leading rusher.
Five, Stidham to throw over the middle. Caught. See you later. Touchdown, KD Cannon.
While most of the debate has swirled around the top 4 teams of the college football playoff, an equally interesting conversation can be had about the first 2 out. Feeling underappreciated and disrespected, both Iowa and Baylor think they're just as deserving of a playoff spot. According to Pro Football Focus's data, which of these teams has a stronger case? On offense, Baylor is still the nation's top team. Their overall grade of 151.1 is nearly triple Iowa's 51.9. But on defense, the teams are neck and neck. The Hawkeyes have the 24th ranked defense with a grade of 92.2, while the Bears are 31st at 76.0. Baylor can make a strong statement over the next 2 weeks with games against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, while Iowa looks poised for a matchup against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. Remember, Pro Football Focus grades every play of every college football game.
And a reverse. The flea flicker. Mayfield down the field. Wide open, and it's caught. Off to the races and a touchdown for the Sooners.
If you want to know why the Oklahoma offense is averaging more than 45 points a game, we'll look no further than Baker Mayfield. With a Pro Football Focus grade of 35.5, he now only trails Trevon Boykin as the best quarterback in the nation. Mayfield's favorite target, Sterling Shepard, ranked the overall 9th best wide receiver. He has dropped just a single pass the entire season. This could be a mismatch to watch in favor of the Sooners, and the Bears secondary Xavier Howard is the only starter with a positive coverage grade. As for the Bears offense, Jarrett Stidham appears to be the real deal. His passing grade of 10.5 on 74 dropbacks already is better than Seth Russell. Of course, he's also still throwing to one of the best receivers in Corey Coleman, whose 20 touchdowns leads the FBS. Expect a wild shootout in Waco this Saturday at 8 Eastern. Remember, Pro Football Focus grades every play of every.
Wow, Corey Coleman again.
While the big question in Waco was how well Jarrett Stidham could fill in for Seth Russell, a bigger issue could be looming for the Bears. Thursday's game against Kansas State was the first time Baylor's defense had faced an offensive line ranked in the top 25 in the country, and, well, the numbers speak for themselves. According to Pro Football Focus, the Bears allowed 168 yards before contact on 48 attempts against the Wildcats. The linebackers were also vulnerable, with Grant Campbell earning a negative 1.1 and Taylor Young a negative 1.9. Baylor needs to get things fixed in a hurry, as Oklahoma, TCU, and Oklahoma State's running games are far more dangerous than Kansas State's. Remember, Pro Football Focus grades every play of every college football game. I'm Shea Pepler. We'll see you next time.
And there he goes.
The one team with the biggest gripe for not being in the top 4 playoff slots might just be the Baylor Bears. Based on the Pro Football Focus data, Baylor's not only the best offensive team in the country with a grade of 141.7, the Bears are a mind-boggling 30 points higher than the number 2 team, the Stanford Cardinals. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, things in Waco may be better than you think. The Bears defense grades out at 63.3. That's better than LSU, and it's better than Stanford. The month of November should be very telling for this team. The schedule includes games against Kansas State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and TCU. Remember, Pro Football Focus grades every play of every college football game. I'm Jordan Cornette.
Do you think Oklahoma can knock off Baylor tomorrow and give that one loss to the Bears?
I do not. I've had Baylor, since midsummer. I said I thought this was the deepest, most talented team in the Big 12, and I have not changed my mind after watching Jarrett Stidham against Kansas State. Clearly, if you're comparing scores from, those teams' visits to Manhattan, you would be siding with the Sooners. They beat the Wildcats 55-0. Baylor kind of held on by a touchdown, but the Bears were still in control of that game, kind of took their foot off the pedal a little bit, and Stidham looked fantastic. He looked every bit like a Baylor quarterback there in his first start. I think he could be just as good, if not better, in his second start. And this game being in Waco, where Art Briles has just, year after year done his best work, has definitely been at home. Oklahoma's really struggled in this matchup the last couple of years. I really like Baylor in this game.
Do you think that the Big 12 pundits, or the Big 12 powers that be, I should say, are terrified, though, of once again getting through this season, or getting through a season, and there being a one-loss Big 12 champion?
Oh, absolutely. I think, not only that, but with the landscape around college football in general, at the start of the season, you maybe say, okay, Clemson maybe isn't as good as, they've been in some past years because of everything they lost on defense. So the ACC will beat itself up. You say maybe the Pac-12 will beat itself up. Maybe the SEC will even have a 2-loss champion because the SEC West is so deep. Those sorts of stories haven't materialized. The Pac-12 has a clear-cut best team in Stanford. The ACC has maybe the best team in the country in Clemson. Alabama's kind of broken away from the pack in the SEC. They're almost, I'll say very likely going to be a one-loss SEC champion. So they're kind of back in the same position they were last year, where if they have an undefeated champion, great, that team's probably going to go to the college football playoff. If they don't, things are going to get very, very dicey. Notre Dame clearly is going to be in the mix as well if they beat Stanford. I think if you're the Big 12, you are rooting right now for Oklahoma State and Baylor to go out, win the rest of their games, and let whoever wins that game between the Bears and the Cowboys in Stillwater sweep the rest of their games.
If there was a one-loss Big 12 champion, do you think it would be the Sooners who the committee would respect most because that one loss would have come earlier in the year than anybody else?
Possibly. The flip side of that is that the loss would be to Texas, which would be a weaker loss than maybe any of the other teams in this sort of round robin they've got right now with the top 4 with TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma. We know the way the committee is treating Notre Dame right now, who has a great loss and a lot of good wins. The quality losses are certainly a big factor for the committee. And Texas at this point is not a quality loss. The Longhorns aren't terrible. They've lost to Notre Dame too, but, losing the way they did at Iowa State, some of their other performances, losing to Cal at home no longer looks like a quality loss. I think that might be a detriment for the Sooners. And, you know, if it ends up being your 11-1 Oklahoma against 11-1 Notre Dame, I think the committee would look at those losses and say, no, we're going to go with the Irish.
Let's go to the Big 12. Much has been made about how the conference would shake itself out. Speaking of that, Oklahoma State, with all the top teams meeting each other starting last weekend. But will it cost the conference an appearance in the playoff? Because it would appear someone's going to have to go undefeated.
This is like Jurassic Park, and they're all carnivores. I'm telling you, they are going to eat their own in this conference. And it's because it's all backloaded. You're not going to get a week off. It's to think that you're going to be at fever pitch 3-4 weeks in a row is going to be very difficult. I don't think anybody survives it.
It's going to be hard. But the one thing now, Oklahoma State, Baylor, they all play each other, and they're rated right now at 6, 8, 12. They got to have some help.
Yeah.
Could happen.
Only team that can get into this playoff with one loss is Oklahoma. They have the brand recognition. Go back to last season. If it had been Oklahoma or Texas sitting there with one loss instead of Baylor or TCU, because of that brand identity, they would have been in.
The playoff committee also doesn't appear to like the wide open throw it all.
I agree. It's not brand, it's style.
What do they have against that style? What's wrong with that style?
I don't know.
As long as
they
you
don't
win,
like
baby. By hook or crook, no matter how you post that W, you post a W. Right, committee.
We got to go to game.
What kind of style you got, committee?
After the weekend, the updated Heisman Trophy odds, according to the Bovada Sportsbook. Derrick Henry now in charge. Leonard Fournette,
large and in charge.
Maybe didn't fall as much as many thought, just 2-1 now. Ezekiel Elliott way back at 7-1, but Christian McCaffrey thought he had a lot of momentum. He's even with Trayvon Boykin, who threw 4 picks in TCU's first loss of the year. And so we begin our 5 and 5. 5 topics in 5 minutes, beginning with a little Heisman talk here. Fournette, a season low, 31 yards. Boykin, the 4 interceptions. How's your Heisman ballot look right now with those guys possibly on it or not? Randy?
Well, I guess a little bit crowded, a little bit different from last week. But I had Derrick Henry, number 1, Corey Coleman, that great year he's having at wide receiver for Baylor. 2, and Dalvin Cook coming off that 194 yards, even in a loss, impressed the heck out of me.
Yeah, Bovada didn't even have Dalvin Cook, Rick.
I've got Deshaun Watson as my top guy. He's replaced Trayvon Boykin as that dual-threat quarterback that everybody loves. Fournette's fallen to number 2, but I still think plenty of time for him to get back. And you cannot ignore the 20 touchdown catches of Corey Coleman and the way he does it. He's fantastic.
Man, I could show you guys 50 plays of LSU mashing people. That was an anomaly last week going against Alabama. Leonard Fournette still number 1. Don't judge him by one game. Corey Coleman, lead receiver in the country. Christian McCaffrey, give some West Coast love, all-purpose yards. He can do everything.
What have you done for me lately? Fournette, nothing.
Wow.
Deshaun Watson, number 1 in total offense in the ACC, over 300 yards a game. Derrick Henry was a beast. What a load he was last week. No one wanted to hit him. And Corey Coleman, you mentioned those 20 touchdown receptions. That's a beast out there at wide receiver.